She thought her human husband was too feeble. Until he carried her for 100 miles on the planet Tarsis, humanity had forged a stronghold. The once quiet planet was now home to a society of warriors who had learned to fight for survival, not only against nature, but also against the alien species that sought to conquer it. Amidst this conflict, there was one human who stood out: Daniel Cole, a man of no remarkable strength, no special skills that made him an extraordinary warrior. He wasn't a soldier. He was a simple man, someone who'd lived a quiet life until his path crossed with that of Rhea Varden, a fierce warrior from the Tarsian elite forces. Rhea was everything Daniel was. She was tall, strong, and her combat prowess had made her one of the most respected fighters on the planet. Rhea was not used to weakness, and in many ways, she saw Daniel's quiet and gentle nature as a flaw. She loved him deeply, but she had always questioned his place in this world of war. How could a man like Daniel, who lacked the physical abilities of the Tarsians, stand beside her in such a harsh, unforgiving world? But love, as it often does, defied reason. Despite the doubts that lingered in her heart, Rhea chose Daniel. He was kind, compassionate, and he made her feel safe in ways no warrior ever could. Still, there was always the lingering thought: what if he was too weak? Then came the day when everything would change. The planet was under siege. Alien ships hovered above the horizon, casting ominous shadows across the landscape. The Zorathians, a brutal alien race, had come to take Tarsis, to claim it as their own. They were technologically advanced and far superior to humanity in terms of power. But humanity had something the Zorathians didn't: resilience, the refusal to back down. Rhea and Daniel were both caught in the chaos of the invasion. Rhea was ordered to lead a team of soldiers to fight off the Zorathians at a strategic outpost. Daniel, as a civilian, had no place in this conflict, but he refused to leave Rhea's side. He had already proven his loyalty and love for her. Now, in the face of danger, he would prove his courage. As the battle raged on, Rhea's team fought valiantly. The Zorathians had landed in full force, their advanced weaponry tearing through the defenses. Amidst the chaos, Rhea was struck by a blast from a Zorathian soldier. The blast sent her flying across the battlefield, her body crashing into the dirt with a sickening thud. She didn't move. Her breathing was shallow, and blood pooled around her, darkening the earth beneath her. Daniel, seeing her fall, felt his heart stop. He pushed through the madness, ignoring the shouts of soldiers around him, and made his way to Rhea's side. She was unconscious, her body broken, but still alive. He cradled her in his arms, panic rising in his chest. "Rhea, please," Daniel whispered, shaking her gently. Her eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, and she groaned in pain. "I can't feel my legs, Daniel, it's too late for me." Rhea's voice was weak, her body trembling with every breath. "No, don't say that." Daniel's voice cracked, his face pale with fear. He had no medical training, no idea how to help her in this situation, but he couldn't lose her. He wouldn't let her go. The battle around them intensified. The Zorathians were closing in, and there was no time to waste. Daniel knew that the only chance Rhea had was to get her to the medical facility in the far-off city. But the road was treacherous, and they were still in the midst of enemy territory. Rhea's grip tightened on his hand. "You can't carry me. You're too weak, Daniel." Daniel's face hardened. He had heard those words before, the unspoken doubts that lingered in Rhea's mind, the doubt that he wasn't strong enough to stand by her. But now, in the face of danger, in the face of losing her forever, he had only one choice. "I will carry you." "I'll carry you for as long as it takes," Daniel said, his voice filled with determination. "I'll get you there. You're not dying here, Rhea, not on my watch." With that, Daniel gently lifted Rhea into his arms. She winced in pain but didn't protest. Her body was broken, and she knew he was right. She had no strength left to move. All she had left was trust. Trust in Daniel's love and determination. The same trust she had once doubted. The journey would be long and dangerous. The medical facility was 100 miles away, and every step Daniel took with Rhea in his arms was a step into enemy territory. The Zorathians were everywhere. Yet, despite the odds, Daniel began walking. His legs burned with every step, his body screamed for rest, but he didn't stop. Rhea looked up at him as they walked. She could see the strain on his face, the sweat dripping down his brow, but there was something else in his eyes, a fierce determination. It was a look she had never seen before, and it made her question everything she had once thought about him. Daniel wasn't weak. He wasn't feeble. He was stronger than she had ever realized. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice soft and pained. I'm here, he said without looking at her, his voice steady despite the exhaustion. I never thought you'd be capable of this, Rhea confessed, her words full of emotion. I thought you weren't strong enough to survive in this world, but you're doing it. You're saving me. Daniel paused for a moment, his eyes briefly meeting hers. I'm doing it because I love you, Rhea. I'd do anything to save you. Rhea felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had always admired strength, had always believed that only the physically powerful could survive in this world. But now, looking at Daniel, she realized how wrong she had been. Strength wasn't just about muscle. It was about the will to fight, to never give up, even when everything seemed impossible. The journey wasn't easy. They encountered wild alien creatures, unpredictable weather, and rough terrain, but Daniel never faltered. He carried her through it all, never once giving up, never once considering the possibility that he couldn't do it. Each mile was a testament to his love, his resolve, and his belief that no matter what, Rhea would survive. No matter how much it hurt, no matter how exhausted he became, he would never let her down. With each passing hour, Rhea's respect for Daniel grew. She had seen him fight to protect her before, but this was different. This was not a battle against an enemy, it was a battle against everything that sought to break them. And in that battle, Daniel was winning. As they reached the halfway point, Rhea finally allowed herself to rest, her eyes closing for a moment. She had fought so hard to stay strong, to deny her vulnerability, but Daniel had shown her something she hadn't been able to see before. True strength wasn't about fighting others. It was about fighting for what mattered most. You're the strongest person I know, Daniel, she whispered softly, her voice filled with gratitude. Daniel didn't respond at first. He just kept walking, his feet heavy but determined. He didn't need to say anything. The love between them was all the answer she needed. And so they continued on, step by step, mile by mile, their journey far from over. But for the first time, Rhea knew that they would make it. Not because of her strength, but because of Daniel's unwavering will to protect the woman he loved. No matter what, the journey had only just begun, but Daniel could already feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. Rhea, the woman he loved, was still unconscious in his arms, her body fragile and broken from the blast. The distance to the medical facility felt endless, and each step he took was one more mile closer to their goal, and one more mile of exhaustion. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel knew they had to keep moving. The Zorathians were still in pursuit, and they couldn't afford to be caught. The moonlight cast long shadows across the barren land, and the wind howled in the distance. The once beautiful world of Tarsize was now a battlefield, a dangerous place where every corner could hide an enemy or a wild creature. Daniel's mind raced with thoughts of what could go wrong, but he pushed them aside. He couldn't afford to think about failure. He couldn't afford to think about what might happen if he couldn't make it. All that mattered now was getting Rhea to safety. Every step he took, every ounce of strength he summoned was for her. Rhea stirred slightly in his arms, her breathing shallow and uneven. He adjusted his grip, trying to make her as comfortable as possible, but the reality of the situation hit him harder with each passing moment. She was depending on him, fully. She had no strength left, no ability to fight, and in that moment she needed him in a way he had never been needed before. But doubt still lingered in his mind. Was he truly strong enough to carry her all the way? His legs burned with each step, his back aching under the weight of her body. But despite the pain, despite his growing fatigue, Daniel refused to stop. He wouldn't let anything stop him from fulfilling his promise to her. The path ahead grew more treacherous. Jagged rocks jutted out of the ground, and the ground itself was uneven and unpredictable. It was hard to keep his footing, but Daniel moved with purpose, never slowing down. His mind was clear, focused entirely on the task at hand. The medical facility was still a long way off, and every moment he wasted could cost Rhea her life. They had been walking for hours, and the fatigue was starting to show. Daniel's steps were slower, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but still, he refused to stop. He glanced down at Rhea, her face pale in the moonlight, and his heart tightened. He couldn't bear the thought of losing her, not like this, not when he had come so far to save her. Suddenly, a loud rustling noise echoed from the distance, followed by the unmistakable growl of a creature. Daniel's eyes darted around, scanning the dark landscape. His instincts kicked in. The sound was getting closer. He could hear the crunching of twigs and leaves underfoot. Something was out there, something dangerous. Daniel's heart raced. He had no weapon, no armor. He had nothing but his body and his determination. The creature was almost upon them, and Daniel had only one option. He had to keep moving. He couldn't afford to stop now, not when they were so close to safety. He tightened his grip on Rhea and began to run. His legs screamed in protest, but he pushed through the pain. The wind whipped around him as he sprinted through the wilderness, dodging trees and rocks as fast as he could. Behind him, the growl of the creature grew louder, its pursuit relentless. Daniel's breath came in sharp gasps, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. If he slowed down even for a second, the creature would catch them. And he wasn't about to let that happen. As he ran, Rhea stirred again, her eyelids fluttering open for the briefest of moments. She looked up at Daniel, her eyes blurry with pain, and then slowly her hand reached up to touch his face. Her fingers brushed against his cheek, a gesture so soft and fragile it nearly broke his heart. "Daniel," Rhea whispered, her voice weak and hoarse. "You don't have to do this. I'm not worth it." Daniel's heart ached as he heard her words. He wanted to tell her that she was wrong, that she was worth everything. He wanted to tell her that he would keep fighting for her no matter what, but he didn't have time for words. They had no time. The creature was still chasing them, getting closer with each passing second. "Don't worry," Daniel said, his voice full of determination. "We're almost there, just hold on, we're almost safe." With that, Daniel pushed forward, his legs moving faster as the creature's growl grew louder behind them. The sounds of its pursuit sent a jolt of adrenaline through his body, and for the first time since they began their journey, Daniel felt fear. It wasn't just fear for himself, it was fear for Rhea. If he couldn't outrun the creature, if he couldn't protect her, everything he had done would have been for nothing. The path ahead was narrowing, the trees growing denser and more difficult to navigate. Daniel's breath came in quick, shallow gasps, and his body was starting to slow. His muscles were burning with exhaustion, but he didn't dare stop. Not yet. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, Daniel darted to the side, slipping between two large rocks, hoping to lose the creature in the darkness. The growl behind them faded slightly, and Daniel dared to hope. But just as quickly, the sound grew louder, closer, and a massive, shadowy figure lunged at him from the dark. Without thinking, Daniel spun around, instinctively throwing himself between the creature and Rhea. He wasn't a soldier, and he didn't have the combat training Rhea had, but in that moment he was her protector. His body collided with the creature's, sending them both tumbling to the ground. The creature's claws scraped against his side, and he winced in pain. But Daniel refused to give up. His hands grasped a large rock nearby, and with all his remaining strength he swung it at the creature's head. The blow landed hard, and the creature howled in pain. It recoiled for a moment, giving Daniel the opportunity to scramble back to his feet. He didn't look back at the creature. He didn't have time. Instead, he picked Rhea up again, his body screaming in pain, and began to run once more. The creature, still dazed, began to chase them again, but Daniel could feel it slowing. Perhaps the blow had wounded it more than he realized. He didn't know. He didn't care. All that mattered was getting to safety. As they neared a clearing in the woods, Daniel saw the faint outline of a building in the distance. It was the medical facility. They had made it. He could feel the weight of his exhaustion, the tightness in his chest, but it was worth it. They were almost safe. Rhea, still barely conscious, mumbled something faintly, but Daniel couldn't hear her over the pounding of his own heart. He kept running, his body pushing past its limits, determined to get her to safety. And then, just as the last of his strength was nearly gone, they reached the entrance of the medical facility. The doors slid open automatically, and Daniel collapsed to his knees, holding Rhea close. The medical team rushed to their side, but Daniel couldn't speak. He was beyond exhausted. His entire body was screaming for rest, but he didn't care. He had done it. He had saved her. Rhea's eyes fluttered open once more as they laid her on a stretcher, and her voice was weak but full of gratitude. "You did it. You really did it, Daniel." Daniel smiled, though it was barely a smile at all. He was too tired to speak, too exhausted to say anything. But in his heart, he knew there was only one thing that mattered. He had done it. He had kept his promise. The road ahead would still be difficult. There was still much to fight for, much to overcome. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel felt like he had finally proven something. He had shown Rhea and himself that true strength wasn't just about power. It was about heart. And Daniel had more heart than anyone else. Daniel sat next to Rhea, watching as the medical team worked to stabilize her. He had carried her for what felt like days, through danger and exhaustion, and now, for the first time since their journey began, he allowed himself to rest. But his mind was far from calm. He couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The medical facility was quiet, its sterile walls filled with the hum of advanced equipment. Rhea lay unconscious on the table, hooked up to various machines. Daniel's eyes never left her. She was alive, but the injuries she'd sustained were severe. It was impossible to predict how long it would take for her to fully recover. He ran a hand through his hair, his muscles aching from the strain of carrying her. His body had been pushed to its limits, but he had made it. He had kept his promise to her. The weight of that promise was heavier now than ever. What would happen when she woke up? Would she see him differently? Would she still see him as the man who could never stand up to the strength of the Tarsian warriors, or would she see him as something more? Daniel had always known that Rhea was strong. She had been strong before they met, and she had continued to be strong throughout their time together. But he hadn't realized just how much her strength had shaped his view of the world. It wasn't just her physical abilities. It was the way she carried herself, the way she believed in herself even when everything seemed impossible. Daniel had never felt that way. He had always been the quiet one, the one who watched from the sidelines as others fought for what they believed in. He was the one who didn't have the strength to push himself forward to make a difference. Until now. He looked down at his hands, calloused and battered from the journey. His legs were stiff and his body ached with every movement, but none of that mattered. Rhea was alive. He had kept her safe. That was all that mattered. As the hours passed, Daniel stayed by her side, waiting for her to wake up. He didn't want to leave her alone, even for a moment. He couldn't bear the thought of losing her now, after everything they had been through. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Rhea stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she didn't recognize where she was. But then she saw Daniel sitting next to her, and the confusion melted away. Daniel, her voice was weak, barely a whisper, but it was enough to make Daniel's heart race. "I'm here, Rhea," he said softly, leaning closer. "You're safe now, you're at the medical facility." Rhea blinked, her eyes focusing on his face. She tried to sit up but winced in pain, her body still weak from the injuries she had sustained. "Don't try to move too much," Daniel said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder to keep her steady. "You've been through a lot, you need to rest." Rhea looked at him, her eyes filled with something Daniel couldn't quite place. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it. You saved me." Daniel looked down at her, feeling a wave of emotion wash over him. He had done what he had promised, but hearing her say it, hearing her acknowledge what he had done, was something he hadn't expected. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt truly seen. I couldn't lose you," Daniel said quietly. "I couldn't let anything happen to you." Rhea's eyes softened, and she reached out, placing her hand on his. "I never realized how much you were capable of, Daniel. You've always been so quiet, so gentle. I thought you were weak. I didn't understand the strength you have inside." Daniel's heart clenched at her words. He had always known that Rhea saw him as weak, that she didn't believe in him the way she believed in the other warriors. But now, sitting beside her, he realized that he didn't need her to see him the way the Tarsians saw each other. He just needed her to see him for who he was, a man who would do anything for the woman he loved. "I'm not a warrior, Rhea," Daniel said softly, his voice full of honesty. "I don't have the strength that you or the others have, but what I do have is a heart that won't give up. I'll fight for us until my last breath." Rhea's eyes filled with tears, and she squeezed his hand. "I've never been more proud of anyone in my life," she whispered. "You're stronger than I ever imagined, and I don't think I could ever thank you enough for what you've done." Daniel smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. He didn't need her thanks. All he needed was for her to know that he would always be there for her, no matter what. They had both come through this ordeal, and they would face whatever came next together. As the days passed, Rhea's condition slowly improved. The medical team worked tirelessly to heal her wounds, but there was still a long way to go. Daniel remained by her side, never leaving her alone for more than a few moments at a time. He had promised to be there for her, and he was determined to keep that promise. But even as Rhea began to recover, the world around them was changing. The Zorathians had not given up on their invasion of Tarsis. The battle was far from over, and Daniel knew that their fight for survival was only just beginning. One night, as Rhea rested, Daniel sat by the window, staring out at the distant horizon. He had done everything he could to keep her safe, but he knew that the real challenge was still ahead. The Zorathians would be back, and this time they wouldn't stop until they had conquered everything. The question was no longer if they would come, it was when. But Daniel wasn't afraid. He had already proven to himself that he was capable of more than he had ever imagined. He had faced death, danger, and exhaustion, and he had kept going. And now, with Rhea by his side, he knew that they could face whatever came next together. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Daniel turned back to Rhea. She was still asleep, her breathing steady, and for the first time in a long time he felt at peace. The road ahead would be hard, but he wasn't alone anymore. Together, they could survive anything. "I won't let them take you, Rhea," Daniel whispered, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "I'll protect you, always." The quiet hum of the medical facility surrounded Daniel as he sat by Rhea's side. She had been asleep for hours, her body still weak from the injuries she had sustained. The medical team had done their best to patch her up, but the road to full recovery was long. Yet, as each day passed, Daniel could see her strength returning. Her spirit was indomitable, and that gave him hope. As Rhea slept, Daniel's mind raced. He couldn't stay here forever, waiting for her to heal. The world outside was still at war, and the Zorathians had not abandoned their plans to conquer Tarsis. Their ships still hovered above the planet, and every day it felt like the enemy was getting closer. The battle for their world was far from over, but Daniel had another concern. Despite Rhea's recovery, there was something he couldn't shake. The Zorathians were no ordinary invaders. They were a brutal and unforgiving species, led by their queen, Zavara, a woman whose cruelty knew no bounds. Daniel had seen the destruction the Zorathians were capable of, and he knew that their defeat wouldn't come easily. It wasn't just about strength or weapons, it was about survival. They needed a strategy, something that would give them an edge. The more Daniel thought about it, the more he realized that there was a weakness in the Zorathian Empire. He didn't know exactly what it was, but he knew that if they were to have any chance of defeating the Zorathians, they would need to strike at the heart of their power. It wasn't just about fighting soldiers or repelling attacks. It was about understanding the enemy, understanding Queen Zavara herself. Daniel's mind raced as he thought about the information he had gathered during his time in the Zorathian prison. He had learned enough to know that their empire was built on fear, fear of the Queen's power, fear of her will. But what if that fear could be used against them? Rhea stirred in her bed, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at him, her expression softening when she saw the worry on his face. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice still weak, "you're thinking too much, you need to rest, we've both been through enough." Daniel looked down at her, guilt tugging at his heart. He had been so focused on the fight ahead, so determined to find a way to defeat the Zorathians, that he had almost forgotten about her. She had suffered more than he could imagine, and now she was still recovering. "I'm fine, Rhea," Daniel said, forcing a smile. "You're right, though, I've been distracted. I can't stop thinking about what's next, what we need to do." Rhea's eyes studied him carefully. She had always been able to see through his facade, and now, even in her weakened state, she could tell that his mind was elsewhere. "You're still thinking about the war, aren't you?" Daniel nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "The Zorathians have given up. They're still here and they're still a threat. I know we've been through a lot, but we can't wait around for them to come to us. We need to fight back. We need to be ready." Rhea's expression softened, and she reached out, gently placing her hand on his. "I understand, Daniel. But you've already given everything for me. Don't you think it's time to take a step back? Let the soldiers fight. You've done enough." Daniel looked at her, his heart aching. He didn't want to admit it, but part of him felt the weight of her words. He had done more than he ever thought possible. He had carried her, protected her, and made it through the worst of it. But now, with the war still looming, he didn't feel like he had done enough. He couldn't just sit back and wait for others to fight. He had to be a part of it. He had to do his part. "I can't just sit here, Rhea," he said, his voice firm. "We have to take action. We can't wait for the Zorathians to come to us. If we do, we'll lose. I know we can't win the war on our own, but we can make a difference. I have to do something. I can't just let them destroy everything." Rhea closed her eyes for a moment, thinking carefully about his words. When she opened them again, she nodded. "I know you're right. I just don't want to see you get hurt again. You've already given so much. I don't want you to lose yourself in this fight." Daniel smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I won't lose myself, Rhea. I promise. I'm doing this for us, for our future, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect you. She smiled faintly, her eyes filled with gratitude. I know you will. The next morning, Daniel made his decision. He couldn't sit idle any longer. The Zorathians were not just a threat to Tarsize, they were a threat to everything they had built, everything they loved. If he was going to make a difference, he had to be part of the solution. But he couldn't do it alone. Daniel sought out the remaining leaders of the human resistance. They were a small but determined group, their numbers dwindling after each battle. As he walked into the command center, the soldiers and leaders turned to him, surprised to see him so soon after Rhea's recovery. Daniel, one of the leaders, General Hark, said, looking him over with concern. You're not fully recovered. You've been through hell and you're still recovering from what happened. You should rest. I'm done resting, Daniel said, his voice firm. The Zorathians are still here. They're still a threat, and I won't wait around while they destroy everything. We need to fight back. The room went silent for a moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Finally, General Hark nodded. You're right. We can't keep hiding. We need a plan. Daniel looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the soldiers who had fought beside him. We need to strike at the heart of the Zorathian Empire. We need to get to their queen. If we can take her down, we can weaken their forces and take control of the situation. The room fell silent again. The idea of attacking the queen herself seemed impossible, even foolish. But Daniel's determination was undeniable. He had already proven that he was willing to sacrifice everything for this cause, and now he was asking the others to do the same. Are we ready to make this sacrifice? Daniel asked, his voice calm but full of intensity. We can't fight this war like we have been. We need to strike hard, strike fast, and take down the queen. We take down the heart of the enemy and the rest will crumble. One by one, the leaders nodded, their faces set in determination. They knew the risks. They knew how dangerous this mission would be, but they also knew that if they didn't take this chance, they might lose everything. I'm in, General Hark said. Let's take down the queen. And so the plan began. The first step was to gather intelligence on the Zorathian forces. Daniel knew that their queen, Zavara, was more than just a ruler. She was the symbol of the Zorathian Empire's power, and if they could weaken her, they could break the Zorathians' hold on Tarsize. But the queen was not an easy target. She was ruthless, cunning, and well-guarded. The next few days were filled with preparation. Daniel worked alongside the resistance, formulating a plan to infiltrate the Zorathian stronghold. They would need to be stealthy, quick, and above all, united. This mission would require every ounce of strength and courage they had left. But Daniel was ready. He had been ready for this moment his entire life. He had faced challenges before, but nothing like this. The road ahead would be dangerous, but Daniel knew that this was the only way to ensure their survival. If they didn't strike now, if they didn't take down the queen, there would be no future left to fight for. The days leading up to the assault on the Zorathian stronghold were filled with tension. Daniel's nerves were on edge, but there was a calm resolve in his heart. The plan was set, the resistance had gathered their forces, and all that remained was to carry it out. The attack would be swift, silent, and relentless. They had only one chance to make it work. Daniel had spent countless hours preparing, studying the Zorathian defenses, and ensuring every move was calculated. He wasn't a soldier, but he had learned to think like one during his time in the Zorathian prison. He had seen how the enemy operated, how they thought, and he knew that the key to victory was catching them off guard. The element of surprise would be their greatest weapon. The night before the mission, Daniel found himself staring out at the horizon, the quiet calm of the night broken only by the distant sounds of wind and the occasional crackle of static from his communication device. His thoughts turned to Rhea. She had recovered much over the past few days, and while she was no longer bedridden, the weight of the upcoming battle still hung heavy on her. She had made it clear that she wanted to fight alongside him, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't her fight to win. He wanted to protect her, not just from the Zorathians, but from the dangers of war itself. But Rhea wasn't the kind of woman to sit idly by. She had fought through every challenge thrown her way, and Daniel knew that if he tried to stop her, she would simply find another way to fight. So he had made peace with the idea. She was going to fight, and she would do it alongside him, just as she always had. When morning arrived, the entire resistance gathered in the hidden base where they had prepared for this mission. The soldiers were dressed in dark camouflage, their faces hard with determination. The mission was dangerous. No one was under any illusion about the risks. If they failed, it would mean the end of their fight for Tarsize, but the resistance was ready. They had to be. The queen of the Zorathians was not just a ruler, she was the heart of their empire, and to take down the heart meant crippling the entire force. Daniel stood among the soldiers, his nerves steady, his mind focused. Rhea was by his side, her expression as determined as ever. She had fully recovered, but her eyes carried a weight of their own. She knew what they were about to do was no simple mission. If they failed, they would be walking straight into the heart of the Zorathian stronghold, and there would be no way out. As the plan was laid out, Daniel could feel the gravity of the situation. They would split into two groups. One would create a diversion to draw the Zorathians' attention, while the other would infiltrate the stronghold and make their way to Queen Zavara's command center. Their goal was clear: eliminate the queen and break the Zorathian grip on Tarsize. Rhea placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder before they parted for the mission. Her touch was firm, comforting, and she gave him a small, reassuring smile. "We've got this," she said. "We've come this far, we're not turning back now." Daniel nodded, his heart swelling with pride. He knew she was right. They had come too far to stop now. The time for doubts was over. The time for action had arrived. The first phase of the mission began with the diversion. As the resistance forces moved out, the ground shook with the rumble of explosions, and the sounds of gunfire echoed through the air. The Zorathian forces, focused on the chaos at the outskirts of their stronghold, began to scramble. They were unprepared for the attack, and the element of surprise worked in their favor. Meanwhile, Daniel's group slipped into the shadows, moving swiftly and silently toward the heart of the stronghold. They moved like phantoms, sticking to the walls, avoiding detection, and cutting down any Zorathian soldiers who stood in their way. The tension was palpable, each footstep echoing in their ears as they made their way deeper into enemy territory. As they approached the Queen's command center, Daniel could feel his pulse quicken. This was the moment. They were about to face the one person responsible for the invasion of their world, and the weight of that responsibility was not lost on him. He knew that if they succeeded, it would change the course of the war. But if they failed, they would be walking straight into the heart of the Zorathian Empire, and there would be no escape. When they finally reached the command center, Daniel and his group took up positions, their weapons raised, their eyes scanning the room. The door to the Queen's chambers was heavily guarded, but Daniel had a plan. He had seen the security systems during his time as a prisoner, and he knew exactly how to disable them. With a few swift movements, Daniel disabled the door's security, and it slid open with a quiet hiss. The group entered the chamber, weapons drawn, but there was no one inside. The Queen's throne was empty, her presence nowhere to be found. It was then that Daniel realized something. The Queen had known they were coming. She had prepared for this moment. "Trap!" Daniel shouted, but it was too late. The doors slammed shut behind them, and a group of Zorathian soldiers poured into the room, surrounding them from all sides. It was a setup. The Queen had anticipated their every move. The resistance fought valiantly, but the Zorathians were too many and they were too well trained. Daniel could feel the tide of the battle turning against them. He had one last option. He had to find the Queen, no matter the cost. He couldn't let her get away. Not now, not after everything they had sacrificed. With a surge of energy, Daniel broke through the lines of Zorathian soldiers and dashed toward the throne room. He didn't know how long he could keep going, but he didn't care. This was the final test. This was the moment where everything would be decided. He burst into the throne room, and there, sitting on the throne, was Queen Zavara herself. Her eyes gleamed with cold, calculating intelligence, and a sinister smile curled on her lips. "So the human thinks he can defeat me?" Zavara's voice was low and mocking. "You have no idea what you're up against, Daniel Cole. You're nothing but a pawn in a game far bigger than you could ever understand." Daniel's eyes narrowed, his anger rising. "I'm not a pawn," he said, his voice steady. "I'm the one who's going to bring you down." With that, Daniel lunged forward, but the Queen's soldiers stepped in, blocking his path. The battle was fierce, and for every blow Daniel landed, it felt like he was being pushed back further. The Zorathian soldiers were relentless, but Daniel fought with everything he had. He had made it this far, and he wasn't going to stop now. Rhea appeared at his side, her eyes fierce and determined. Together they fought side by side, their movements synchronized. It was the moment they had both been waiting for. This was the ultimate test of their strength, of their love, and of their resolve. The battle raged on, but Daniel knew one thing. They weren't going to stop until Queen Zavara was defeated. They had come too far, sacrificed too much, to turn back now.